Hello and welcome to the Sci-Fi Christian. I'm Bendy Bono, here to talk to you today about the newest Batman video game, Arkham Origins. This is the third in the series, follow-up to, I believe, 2009's hit, Arkham Asylum, which was very revolutionary, not only to superhero video games, but to just video games in general, with its great combat system, a wonderful model. And then Arkham City, a couple of years later, that really built on what Arkham Asylum did and expanded it to a larger area with more to do and added additional complexity and really perfected the model. And now we have Arkham Origins, which is the first game in the series not developed by original developer Rocksteady. The first game in the series where the Joker is not voiced by Mark Hamill. In the first game in the series where Batman / Bruce Wayne is not voiced by Kevin Conroy. And of course, Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill have been with those characters since the animated series. So quite a bit of change with this third installment. So how did it do with that? Because I think there was a lot of people, myself included to a certain extent, who have had some trepidation about those changes. For me, I was especially worried about the voice acting changes. And I should add, Paul Dini, who was involved in the animated series and wrote the stories, or at least was involved in writing the stories for the first two, isn't back for this one either. So lots of creative turnover with this third entry in the series, and especially coming off of two games that were as close to perfect as you can get in video games. I think there was some well-deserved trepidation heading into this. So how did it do? Well, if you look at the reviews that are out there on the internet, you would get the impression that it didn't do so hot. There have been a lot of complaints about this game, a lot of 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10 reviews, talking about how it's just not as good as Arkham City and not as good as Arkham Asylum, and just kind of a dull entry in the series and all that. And some that are even more brutal than that are just tearing into this game. And after finishing it, or at least a large chunk of it, I finished all the main story and many of the side quests, I find myself completely perplexed by those reviews. Okay? Let me get into maybe a few of the common complaints that I've read. First of all, first complaint that comes up is that this game doesn't do anything original in terms of its gameplay. Okay, that's mostly fair and mostly accurate. We have the same combat system in place. We have, as in the first two games, same Predator system. You know, you've got detective mode. Your kind of crime scene scanner gets developed a little bit more. Same type of counters and combat, basically the same enemy types, and boss fights, although I think I liked them a little bit better in this game, are similarly designed and everything. So, okay, fair enough, but is that a bad thing? I mean, Arkham City and Arkham Asylum had some of the most perfect gameplay that we've seen in a long, long time. And so it's not like they took something that was bad and failed to improve it. They took something that was great and kept it great. There's a lot of games that have the same gameplay, essentially, in the sequel. And they get praised through the roof. Super Mario Galaxy 2. Is there anything different in that gameplay from the first game? Not really. I mean, a few of the suits are different and everything, but so much of that game is almost identical in its gameplay design as the first one. That doesn't stop it from being brilliant. I love that game. The Uncharted series, all three of those have essentially the same gameplay. In fact, I can't think of one major difference in the gameplay. And again, we're just talking that, not graphics, not level design, not anything like that, but the mechanics of the game between those three. But they're all great games. And in fact, the third one's probably the best. The second one's probably the best in Uncharted. But having unchanged gameplay in a series can be a problem, but not if the original gameplay is great. And some of these complaints are citing things like, well, the first two games were so revolutionary. No, the first game was revolutionary with its gameplay. Arkham City took what Arkham Asylum did in a revolutionary way and tweaked very little. They perfected it, but they didn't drastically change it. Arkham City wasn't revolutionary with its gameplay. Arkham Asylum was. And same thing with Arkham Origins. It's not revolutionary in its gameplay. But that's okay. The gameplay's perfect. So I fundamentally don't understand that complaint. Okay. Another complaint is that Gotham City is largely reused from Arkham City. Well, this is about half true. Okay, so the city part of Arkham City, this is a prequel, by the way, so it's not Arkham City yet, where in that game it was walled off and basically turned into a giant prison. We have all of those areas in this game, but there's also quite a bit more. We see more of Gotham. So about half the map is Arkham City and half the map is all new to Arkham Origins. So let's think about that for a second. You have as much new level space in this game as Arkham City did. Just as much. The only difference is that we also get to revisit some of these old places in a new way. And quite frankly, all these games are supposed to be in continuity with each other, so what's wrong with building a world for Batman to explore in different games? I liked that. It never felt like it was being reused because they used those areas in fundamentally different ways than Arkham City did. You know, and for example, you don't go up in the tower and all that where Hugo Strange is. You're not really into Wonder City or whatever that was underground. Things just feel very different, even if it's the same basic design. And so it's about world building in a series. And this is a good thing. You know, unlike the Uncharted games, or Mario, for example, where we're introduced to a new world every time, Batman is in Gotham City. So if we're going to have a series of games in continuity with each other, they're going to be set in Gotham City, the same Gotham City. So it's insane to complain that it's using some of the same maps. This is a good thing. This is what we want. I hope the next game uses parts or all of both Arkham City and Arkham Origins, maybe even Arkham Asylum, while also giving us new stuff. Make it bigger. Let us see more of Gotham, but let us still feel like we're in Gotham. And this game does a great job of that. So I don't understand that complaint either. Let's talk about one complaint that I do kind of see. There's some complaints out there that the city feels lifeless. Yeah, it does. For example, Arkham City, you know, I remember the first time I played that game is you get out of kind of the introduction stuff and you're in the city itself and you're looking around and there's all these kind of Easter eggs with references to stuff. You know, there's the Maxi Zeus Tower and then you've got Riddler trophies all over the place. This game doesn't really have that. And it feels like a lack of polish. And this is probably the most significant criticism of this game that I have, is that it felt like it needed just maybe 6 more months of art design or something to make the city give that kind of there's something cool to look at around every corner feel that both Arkham Asylum and Arkham City had. You know, for example, there are Riddler challenges in this game, but instead of these question mark trophies, you're picking up Enigma data packs. Same essential thing, but having a cool looking question mark trophy gives it a different feel. It catches your eye more than just what's essentially a green box. It just isn't the same, you know, and yeah, and then the lack of references to things in Batman's world and everything within Gotham City. Just not as good. So I'm not going to sit here and complain that or claim that every last bit of the game design is as good as Arkham City and Arkham Asylum. On that last point especially, this is far below those two. But in terms of gameplay, in terms of the world, I think game developers are being or game critics are being unnecessarily harsh simply because Rocksteady didn't do this game. Well, they didn't do the game, but the crew that did a great job. Now let's talk the voice acting a little bit, because as I said, I was worried about Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill not being involved. Well, honestly, the 2 new actors, and I forget their names. I know that the guy who plays the Joker is the same one who played Joel in The Last of Us. but I don't remember his name. They did a great job. They do a really, really good job. Would I still want Kevin Conroy back? Yeah. Would I still want Mark Hamill back? Yeah. But do I feel like these two did anything other than a near perfect job? No. In a way, the voice acting is an interesting parallel to the game development, okay? Would I prefer to have Rocksteady doing this game so that we have the same developer in this entire series? Absolutely. Would I prefer to have, our voice talent back? Absolutely. Did their replacements do a great job? Yes. In both cases, yes. Okay. Now let's talk about the story. Because this is where the low scores completely boggle my mind. The story for Arkham Origins is head and shoulders above the stories for Arkham Asylum or Arkham City. Arkham City's story is a bit of a mess, if you think about it. Obviously, we buy into a somewhat ludicrous premise that we've not only walled off half of Gotham City, or at least a portion of Gotham City, and let it turn into a war zone for criminals. Okay, I'll buy that because it's a comic book thing. Whatever. You can't ask too many logic questions when it comes to comic books. I accept that. But think of the narrative. I'll go light on spoilers here. I'm not going to get into anything too big. But Hugo Strange, great Batman villain, completely wasted in the narrative. He really had nothing to do. You see him a few times, and his menacing voice pops up every now and then, and that's okay. But Hugo Strange to me was a huge disappointment in Arkham City, how they used him in the story. The whole thing with bringing up Clayface towards the end, and I won't get into what context because that's a spoiler, but did that make sense to anyone, what they were trying to do there? That just seemed weird and unnecessary, and just overcomplicating the narrative. And then, of course, the controversial twist at the end. Why? And I won't say what it is, but if you've played the game, you know what it is. It's just, what was the point of that? Why would you do that with an ongoing series like this? It didn't make any sense. So I have a lot of issues with Arkham City's narrative. Does that mean it was bad? No. No, it was a good narrative, but there were problems with it. This narrative is very powerful, though, in terms of exploring Batman. It really gets into Batman's psychology in a way that only the Nolan films and some of the better graphic novels have been able to do. But it also is able to do something that I haven't seen done this well, which is to really explore the often hostile, at least initially, because this is at the beginning of Batman's career, the often hostile relationships Batman has with both Alfred and with Commissioner Gordon. So let's start talking about Alfred, because this was great. This was really, really well done in the game. And I just applaud the writing staff, because you have Alfred and Bruce who love each other, very father and son, but Alfred very clearly disapproves of what Bruce Wayne is doing. And Bruce Wayne is tired of Alfred's disapproval. And so, yes, they're helping each other, but they're clashing heads a lot in this game. To the point where it's like, Batman almost feels like there's this soft abuse of Alfred and the way he takes him for granted and bullies him around to get him to help him with this mission. How he doesn't listen to this guy who essentially raised him and loved him from childhood. It's a surrogate father for him. Very powerful moments later in the game as that relationship develops and they learn greater trust with each other, not in a cheesy way, but in a way that you can see how they take it from what would be Alfred's initial disapproval, naturally, of Bruce deciding to do this, to being the partners that they are in the later stages of the mythology. And we saw very little of that relationship in the other two games, so that was great. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. And then, of course, we have Commissioner Gordon, who is throughout this game trying to capture Batman and regarding him in a very hostile way. And Batman and Gordon are clashing constantly throughout this game. And we know they both need each other. Neither of them is going to survive and accomplish their goals in the city without the other. And the police force is incredibly corrupt. And Batman needs somebody who's an ally to him within the city. but they are just going at each other constantly in this game, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant. And this is one of the things the Nolan movies weren't really able to explore. I mean, think about when Batman first meets Gordon, is that, he kind of pretends to hold the gun behind his head, and it's really a stapler, and there's like one scene where Gordon chases him out of that, and then after that they're essentially allies for the rest of the movie in Batman Begins. No, here we go through a whole process of them working through what would be initial antagonism. Same thing with Alfred, going back to that. You remember the scene in Batman Begins where Alfred's at the party and he's watching the Tumbler car chase on TV and is very disapproving of what's going on. And we have that clash between Alfred and Bruce that's really well done in the movie. Well, we take that kind of one scene and we expand that out through an entire feature-length narrative with Batman and Alfred's relationship, and it's so well done. And of course, we get the Joker. This is Batman and the Joker's first meeting with each other, and the way that we get into the psychology of the Joker is really, really good. Not to give too much away here, and I won't give plot points away, but we remember the scenes in Arkham Asylum where Batman was in kind of the Scarecrow's fear toxin, and they used those scenes to kind of develop his psychology and get us into his head a little bit. We get a similar scene, except with the Joker in that place. It's not fear toxin. I won't go into what's going on because you want to be surprised by it, but it's really cool. It's really well done. It gets you into what is the Joker? What is his motivation? And then there's a part later on where they're fighting each other, and the Joker says something to Batman, which is essentially, you like this, as he's, beating the hell out of him. You like this. This is how you get off. And that, to me, was such a perceptive take on Batman's psychology in the writing, is that, okay, is this guy a sociopath? Is Bruce Wayne, Batman, a sociopath who has chosen to channel that evil and hatred and anger into something positive? Or is it positive? Ostensibly positive, at least from his perspective. So this game does a great job of making you think about Batman, think about these main characters. Like the Arkham games, there's a lot of other side villains in, and they're used well. You have a villain like Firefly who would never be used well in a movie because as a main villain would just be terrible. But in this narrative, he makes an effective obstacle to Batman on his way to encounter the larger villains in this series, or in this game. So, like the other Arkham games, does a great job bringing in more of the minor members from the Batman Rogues Gallery. In particular, I thought this game did a lot better. It made a lot better use of Mad Hatter, which Mad Hatter's a really tough villain to do because he's incredibly cheesy. And Arkham City did a decent job with Mad Hatter. This game actually makes him into a somewhat compelling villain for his portion of the narrative. It's more of like a side story, so you could skip it if you want to, but it's worth checking out. So the story is just lights out incredible with this game. In fact, if you're not going to play the game, go find the edited movie version on YouTube or whatever and watch it, because this is a narrative that, is not as good as the Nolan movies, because seriously, what is in the Batman mythology comes close. It's really, really good. This is a great, great narrative. Whereas the other two, I would say, okay, they're good video game narratives. They're interesting. I like seeing Batman. It kind of feels like an adult animated series episode. But I wouldn't say they were great. They were good. They weren't great. This is a great narrative. So, let's add this up. Narrative, better than the previous two games. Gameplay, as good as the previous two games. Game design, step below. So we have one step below the previous two games, one on par and one above. So why is this game getting hate? Because it wasn't made by Rocksteady, because it has a different developer and slightly different talent, so we're predisposed to not like it? Screw that! This is a great game! If you like the other two, you're going to like this one. Is it a substantial jump away from the game design of the other two? No. But you know what? It tells a great Batman story. And quite frankly, I'd rather have a great story with the same gameplay than improved gameplay with an story. Story matters, especially when we're talking about Batman. I mean, he's a mythological figure in our pop culture, and one of the ones that has, fortunately, been done well many times, unlike many of the Marvel characters that have just been well, I won't get into the MCU right now, but, feel like, in my opinion, have basically been turned into cheap entertainment. I think great stuff has been done with Batman, and this is another example of it. And we who are fans of this type of stuff should be positive in supporting what is a truly amazing narrative with an amazing game. So I'm going to give it 4.5 stars out of 5. Yeah, I'll take it down a little bit. I'd give the other 2 5. So is this my least favorite of the 3? In terms of game design, sure. In terms of story, absolutely not. But, I think the game design thing with the lifeless city feeling is a big enough issue where I'm going to take that half star off. But, honestly, in the grand scheme of things, that doesn't stop this game from being incredible amounts of fun to play and a thought-provoking, moving story. Don't believe the reviews. I honestly don't get where they're coming from on this. And if you listen to the podcast, I'm not somebody to be artificially positive about stuff. When something sucks, I'm going to say it. This doesn't suck. This is an awesome game. Awesome story. Why aren't you playing it? Shut this review off. Go download it on Steam. It's incredible. So that's all for now. I'm Ben DiBono. 4.5 stars for Arkham Origins. This is the Sci-Fi Christian. Goodbye.